In the desert darkness outside Palm Springs in 1949, a young couple sped toward the sleeping farm town of Indio. The driver, already drunk and unhappy in his marriage, was the singer Frank Sinatra. His companion, equally inebriated and just out of a loveless marriage, was the 27-year-old actress Ava Gardner. They pulled over on a dusty side street, stepped out of the car, and began shooting out streetlights with matching handguns. When the local police hauled them to the station, the lovers laughed and charmed their way out of trouble after the studio paid quite a bribe. A few hours later, Gardner walked into the house she shared with her sister, Bappy, and announced in her Carolina drawl that she'd had a wonderful time with the married man who would soon leave his wife for her. Those flashes of reckless romance, guns, booze, laughter, and freedom would come to define Ava Gardner's life. She was one of the great beauties of Hollywood's golden age, a woman with Andean green eyes and cheekbones that seemed to catch the light. She swore like a navvy, slept with bullfighters and presidents, drove Sinatra to near destruction, and lived life with a carnality and independence rare among women of her era. She was known as the most beautiful animal in the world, and her life was a deep, dark, and thrilling mystery. Welcome to Hollywood Mysteries. Ava Lavinia Gardner was born on Christmas Eve of 1922 in the small farming community of Grabtown, near Smithfield in Johnson County, North Carolina. She was the youngest of 7 children born to Jonas Bailey J.B. Gardner, a tobacco farmer and sawmill operator, and his wife, Mary Elizabeth Molly Baker, a Baptist Sunday school superintendent. Their house, the largest in the community, had neither electricity nor indoor plumbing, and her parents' piety instilled a sense of moral propriety that would paradoxically shape her later rebellion. The Gardners were respected locally and even donated timber to build the Sardis Baptist Church. Yet, within 2 years of Ava's birth, a regional agricultural depression forced the family to sell their land and move down the road to operate a boarding house for 6 school teachers. The economic ruin of the 1920s and early 1930s hit the Gardners hard. Ava's father maintained the boarding house grounds and ran a small sawmill. Her mother cooked and acted as a second mother to the teachers who boarded there. Little Ava was both shy and mischievous, a tomboy who climbed the boarding house water tower and once injured her leg crawling through a broken window to retrieve her school books. When the Great Depression deepened, the state withdrew funding for the boarding house, and the family moved to Newport News, Virginia, where Molly ran a boarding house for shipyard workers and J.B. took whatever work he could find. Ava was still a teenager when her father died of bronchitis in 1938, leaving the family both grief-stricken and impoverished. Back in North Carolina, the Gardners relocated yet again to the small community of Rockridge. Molly operated yet another boarding house for teachers, and Ava attended Rockridge High School, graduating in 1939. Classmates mocked her hand-me-down clothes, and she grew up acutely aware of these class differences. For a time, she studied secretarial work at Atlantic Christian College in Wilson, all the while imagining a life far from the poverty of her upbringing. But destiny intervened when she boarded a train to New York City to visit her older sister, Beatrice, known as Bappy, and Bappy's husband, the photographer, Larry Tarr. Tarr took a portrait of his teenage sister-in-law and placed it in the window of his Fifth Avenue studio. That photograph would change her life. Before I go on with the incredible story of the photograph that changed movie history, I'd like to show you the glamorous range of shirts I currently have on offer over at our store. If you're a movie buff and want to show off your love of Golden Age stars like Rudolph Valentino, Barbara Stanwyck, Marlene Dietrich, Louise Brooks, or William Powell, then I've got the exclusive designs just for you. What about this Nick and Nora shirt, which of course includes their famous pup Asta? Or this enticing design featuring the magnificent Anna May Wong? The shirts are expertly printed on the highest quality super soft cotton and come in sizes up to 5XL. Prices start at $25 and they ship to most territories worldwide. Every sale is an enormous help to the channel, and I'd like to thank all of you who have made a purchase so far, and for all the amazing positive feedback on the shirts. Now let's get back to Ava's shot at the big time. One day, Lowe's theater clerk named Bernard Duen noticed Ava's portrait in the studio window and commented that somebody ought to send it to MGM. Tar promptly did so. MGM were quick to recognize the photogenic teen's potential and offered her a screen test. In 1941, Gardner, then 18 and still a student at Atlantic Christian College, found herself on her way to MGM's New York office. She was filmed walking toward the camera, rearranging flowers and turning as requested while cameras rolled. The studio didn't bother to record her voice because her thick Carolina drawl was almost incomprehensible to them. Nevertheless, MGM head Louis B. Mayer famously telegraphed his New York talent department, "She can't sing, she can't act, she can't talk. She's terrific." Gardner signed a standard 7-year contract with MGM at $50 per week and left college for Hollywood. Her sister Bappy accompanied her, acting as chaperone and surrogate mother because Molly refused to let her youngest daughter travel cross-country alone. The first order of business for MGM was speech lessons to neutralize her accent and singing coaching so that her rich alto could be harnessed. Gardner later admitted that she was so shy that she sometimes drank before scenes to steady her nerves. She spent the early 1940s trudging through uncredited bit parts in films like H.M. Pullum Esquire and Babes on Broadway, usually cast as a showgirl, co-ed, or decorative bystander. While other starlets ate lunch at the MGM commissary, she was too intimidated to join them. Actor Arlene Dahl recalled that Gardner was so scared of seeing glamorous stars like Lana Turner and Greer Garson that she ate elsewhere. During those lean years, she worked hard, took direction from coaches and directors, and watched how more experienced actors carried themselves on set. 15-bit roles later, in 1943's Ghost on the Loose, she finally received her first screen credit. The film was a low-budget comedy, but Ava's name on the poster meant something. The industry had taken notice. Yet it would take another 3 years for her to explode onto the screen. That explosion occurred when independent producer Mark Hellinger cast her opposite Burt Lancaster in 1946's The Killers, Ernest Hemingway's noir tale of betrayal and doomed men. Gardner's turn as the femme fatale Kitty Collins was mesmerizing. She played a seductive chanteuse whose smoldering gaze and languid movements justified the murders committed in her name. Critics loved her performance, and audiences who had never before heard of Ava Gardner were now entranced. Overnight, she became the archetypal film noir siren. Around the time MGM was grooming her for the break which would be The Killers, Gardner's personal life had begun to intertwine irrevocably with her career. She first met fellow contract player Mickey Rooney on the MGM lot in the early 40s, when he ran across a set dressed as Carmen Miranda during filming of Babes on Broadway. Gardner was astonished to see a tiny man in platform heels and a fruited turban. Rooney paused mid-song to flirt with her, and within months the pair married. She later told dancer and actress Ann Miller, "Don't let the little guy fool you. He knew every trick in the book." The marriage, which took place on 10th of January 1942 in the remote town of Ballard, to avoid ruining Rooney's all-American screen image, lasted barely a year. Gardner filed for divorce in 1943, citing mental cruelty. Privately, she blamed his gambling and infidelity, but she refused to damage his wholesome public persona. The death of Ava's mother, Molly, on the very day her divorce from Rooney became final made this a particularly devastating moment. "It was the saddest day of my life," she later said. Still grieving, Gardner plunged into a second marriage with the famous bandleader Artie Shaw in 1945. Shaw, an intellectual and avid reader, encouraged his insecure new wife to enroll at UCLA. She took literature and economics courses, and in fact excelled. Yet Shaw's controlling nature soon suffocated her. He gave her reading lists, corrected her speech, and seemed determined to mold her into his idea of a cultured woman. Gardner wasn't happy with the weight of this expectation, and the marriage collapsed within a year. By 1946, she was single again, and on the cusp of true stardom after The Killers. Her image, sultry, independent, slightly dangerous, fit neatly with her private persona, a small-town girl who had discovered Los Angeles nightlife and was determined to enjoy it. She smoked, drank bourbon, gambled in Las Vegas, and danced until dawn. In this period, she began a long, complicated friendship with the reclusive millionaire and aviator Howard Hughes. She later insisted she was never in love with Hughes, but acknowledged that he trusted her and would drift in and out of her life for 20 years. She described him as painfully shy and more eccentric than anyone I had ever met. Their relationship embodied the contradictions of Ava Gardner's femme fatale persona, a woman who allowed an immensely powerful man to provide her with airplanes and jewelry, yet refused to sleep with him. As Ava's film roles improved and her love affairs multiplied, the question presented itself. Would her own talent ever be judged apart from the men she married or the scandals she provoked? With 2 marriages behind her at age 24 and a destructive friendship with Howard Hughes forming, Hollywood gossip columnists asked whether she was another pretty face headed toward ruin, or whether the rebellious farm girl would have the guts to seize control of her own story. The answer would arrive in the form of another famous face and the so-called love affair of the century, an affair that upended 2 careers, toppled marriages, and left a permanent mark on American popular culture. After The Killers, Ava Gardner entered a prolific period in which her beauty and growing acting skills helped her carry major productions. In 1946's Whistle Stop, she played opposite George Raft and was able to sharpen her screen presence in a solid crime melodrama. The following year, she starred in The Hucksters with Clark Gable, demonstrating a lighter touch as an idealistic young war widow. Her star turn came in Showboat in 1951, where she sang the Torque song Bill and the standard Can't Help Lovin' Dat Man. In fact, MGM executives worried her voice wasn't strong enough, so they had Annette Warren dub her songs. Gardner was furious about the decision, but when she recorded Bill for the film soundtrack, the rich, smoky quality of her voice surprised even her detractors. In Pandora and the Flying Dutchman, she took the title role of Pandora, a free-spirited woman in a mythic tale of doomed lovers that was shot in the picturesque Spanish town of Tossa de Mar. The villagers adored her, and decades later, the town erected a bronze statue of her as Pandora overlooking the sea. Gardner followed with more film adaptations of Ernest Hemingway's stories, including The Snows of Kilimanjaro and The Sun Also Rises. She became the face of the Hemingway woman to the movie-going public, and this brought about both a professional and personal friendship with the great novelist. The author admired her toughness and authenticity. She admired his macho charm and the exotic nature of his stories and life. Hemingway introduced her to matadors and wrote to friends that Ava understood the art of bullfighting even better than most Spaniards, meant as a compliment to Ava rather than a slight against the Spanish. In Lone Star, she acted opposite Clark Gable again, and in Mogambo, she played a brash showgirl caught between Gable and Grace Kelly. Her performance in Mogambo earned her an Academy Award nomination for Best Actress, the only Oscar nod of her career. She later quipped that working with director John Ford was like enduring boot camp. The meanest man on earth, thoroughly evil, adored him. In 1954, Gardner starred in The Barefoot Contessa, playing Maria Vargas, a Spanish dancer discovered by a Hollywood director who becomes an international star and marries into European nobility. The role mirrored aspects of Gardner's own life. She loved to go barefoot at home, and she moved easily between Los Angeles, Spain, and London. This was around the time MGM's publicity department dubbed her the world's most beautiful animal. Gardner, for her part, understood that she was often valued more for her looks than her acting. That said, many felt she never had the screen career her talents deserved, and that her looks made that inevitable. Another inevitable outcome of her looks was the effect they had on men. Gardner's third marriage to singer and actor Frank Sinatra was the most storied and turbulent relationship of her life. They first met in 1943 at a Hollywood party. At the time, Sinatra was married to his childhood sweetheart Nancy, and Gardner was still married to Rooney. They flirted for years, but their romance ignited in the late 1940s after the fateful night I described in the intro, when they ran wild and turned into vandals when they shot out streetlights in Indio. Sinatra, deeply unhappy in his marriage and struggling with his career, left Nancy for Ava. The Catholic Church, gossip columnist Hedda Hopper and Luella Parsons, and many of his fans excoriated him. The scandal nearly ended his career. Nonetheless, Gardner and Sinatra married in November 1951. They did their best to have a honeymoon with some privacy, but this would prove impossible. They gave reporters the slip and headed to Miami, but in the melee, Ava lost her suitcase, meaning she had to wear Frank's clothes for the first couple of days. She remembered later, "So I slept in Frank's pajamas, at least the top half of them, and the next day we walked along the empty beach. Me in the bottom half of my travel suit and Frank's jacket. Naturally, a photographer was lying in wait and snapped a shot of us, barefoot, holding hands. I've always thought it was a sad little photograph, a sad little commentary on our lives then. We were simply two young people so much in love, and the world wouldn't leave us alone for a second. It seemed that everyone and everything was against us, and all we asked for was a bit of peace and privacy." He later called her the love of his life. She wrote in her memoir that he was the only man she'd ever truly loved. However, passion and jealousy erupted almost immediately. They fought publicly and privately. She said, "Both Frank and I were high-strung people, possessive and jealous and liable to explode fast. When I lose my temper, honey, you can't find it anyplace. I've just got to let off steam, and he's the same way." Sinatra's career slump drove him to drink in despair, and he attempted suicide on more than one occasion. She used her connections to secure him the role of Maggio in From Here to Eternity by persuading Columbia boss Harry Cohn to cast him, primarily by tapping up Cohn's wife Joan, who Ava knew. Cohn didn't like the idea but eventually agreed to a screen test. Sinatra impressed and won the role. In turn, the film won Sinatra an Academy Award and revived his singing career. Meanwhile, the couple's domestic life was utterly chaotic and fired up by constant jealousy. "It was another sort of jealousy that ate into our bones," she said. They entertained lavishly, traveled the world, and sometimes didn't speak for days. Gardner became pregnant twice but aborted both pregnancies because MGM's standard practice was to impose harsh penalties on actresses who had children. When enraged, she hurled heavy objects at her lovers, and Sinatra was no exception. Although she most famously hurled a marble ashtray at Howard Hughes and scored a direct hit, an act she later thought had killed him until he staggered up off the floor bleeding profusely. While she never laid Sinatra out flat quite so dramatically, the mix was highly volatile. The marriage lasted 6 years. She filed for divorce in 1954, but they didn't finalize it until 1957. Despite the legal separation, they remained devoted friends. When Gardner suffered a debilitating stroke decades later, Sinatra paid for her private medical flight to Los Angeles and covered her hospital bills. He also sent one of the first floral tributes to her funeral. In her memoirs, she remembered her time with Frank as simply lovers forever, eternally. Gardner's screen opportunities shifted as she moved through the 1950s. She played Guinevere opposite Robert Taylor's Lancelot in the Technicolor epic Knights of the Round Table in 1953. And she portrayed a colonial-born Anglo-Indian woman in Bawani Junction, a film whose marketing featured some cringe-inducing exoticism. In the aforementioned The Sun Also Rises, she convincingly played Lady Brett Ashley, a woman whose sexual independence drives the narrative. The film's setting in Spain allowed her to stay near her lover, the bullfighter Luis Miguel Dominguín, who also became a lover of Linda Christian. If you want to know more about Linda's truly wild rides, check out my video on her that I put out recently. Even during her marriage to Sinatra, Gardner had continued to attract a constellation of lovers, much to Sinatra's fury. There was the eternal presence of Howard Hughes, of course, who once flew into a jealous rage when she went out with crooner Mel Torme. She later had an affair with actor George C. Scott while filming The Bible, although he drank heavily and was allegedly abusive. She also romanced actor Robert Mitchum, David Niven, future U.S. President John F. Kennedy, Robert Taylor, Steve McQueen, French chef Claude Terral, and film director John Huston. Not all of Gardner's significant relationships with men were romantic, though. She formed a deep friendship with actor Gregory Peck. The two starred together in 3 films and remained close for life. When she died, Peck took in her housekeeper and dog. Ava also indulged in affairs with women including, allegedly, Lana Turner, singer Chavela Vargas, and British actress Christine Norden. She also became friends with the future Princess of Monaco, Grace Kelly, on the set of Mogambo. Kelly initially disapproved of Gardner's drinking and sexual freedom, calling her, quote, "such a mess it's unbelievable." Gardner's sense of humor and generosity eventually won the younger actress over. They visited Rome together, toured a brothel at Gardner's insistence, and even shared a boozy double date that ended with the improbable sight of the usually straight-laced Grace Kelly dragging a local boy along for some heavy necking in the backseat of a taxi. Gardner also attempted to set Kelly up with Greek shipping magnate Aristotle Onassis, describing him as a, quote, "forceful lover." Onassis repulsed her and she declined in no uncertain terms. Ava later said that, quote, "not even a good whipping would have changed her mind" about Onassis. Ava was a liberal Democrat in a conservative era and took an interest in politics. In 1959, she traveled to Cuba and met Fidel Castro, who at that time was seen by many on the American left as a romantic revolutionary and on the right as public enemy number 1. Castro greeted her gallantly and gave her a tour of his Havana headquarters. They drank Cuba Libres on a balcony while he outlined his vision for a new nation, and evidently Ava outlined her vision of a passionate affair between them. The meeting certainly drew the ire of Castro's mistress, Marita Lorenz. After an altercation in an elevator during which Gardner slapped Lorenz, Ava's bodyguard drew his gun, and Castro decided to distance himself from the actress by tactfully sending her off with a handsome aide to, quote, "satisfy her." Gardner's wit and candor became legendary. When a photographer at a press junket asked what she saw in Sinatra, given that he was just a, quote, 119-pound has-been, she smiled sweetly and replied, "Well, I'll tell you, 19 pounds of him is cock." Her language was proudly that of sailors and truck drivers, yet audiences and journalists remained enthralled. She drank heavily, slept around, ate heartily, and outcussed the men around her. This performative masculinity in such a beautiful and successful woman unnerved some contemporaries but also offered a model of female autonomy rarely seen in mid-century Hollywood outside of Carole Lombard and a few others. By the mid-1950s, Gardner had become wary of Hollywood's hypocrisy and the relentless tabloid attention. In 1955, she moved to Madrid, drawn by Spain's bullfighting culture and its more relaxed attitude towards celebrity. There, she attended fights, drank in flamenco bars, and hosted lavish parties. Her apartment became a gathering place for expatriates and artists. Poet Robert Graves and novelist James A. Michener were among her circle. She loved Spanish food and the freedom to wander the streets without being mobbed by fans. Spain also placed her closer to Dominguín, with whom she had a tempestuous on and off romance. In one famous incident, she threw a glass at him during an argument, the shards missing his eye by inches. Their passion, as ever, burned bright but brief. Her last major leading role came in John Huston's The Night of the Iguana in 1964, a Tennessee Williams adaptation shot on the coast of Puerto Vallarta. She played Maxine Falk, a widow who runs a ramshackle hotel and lusts after Richard Burton's alcoholic priest. The performance won her the Silver Shell for Best Actress at the San Sebastian International Film Festival and brought nominations for Golden Globe and BAFTA awards. As she aged, roles dwindled. She appeared in the political thriller 7 Days in May as the lover of Burt Lancaster, and as Sarah, the biblical wife of Abraham in Dino De Laurentiis' 1966 epic, The Bible, In the Beginning. She briefly sought the role of Mrs. Robinson in 1967's The Graduate, calling director Mike Nichols and telling him she wanted the part. Nichols, who visited her at her hotel, later recalled that she sat at a French desk, phone in hand, and declared, "All right, let's talk about your movie. First of all, I strip for nobody." The role went to a younger actress, Anne Bancroft. Gardner also appeared in international co-productions such as 55 Days at Peking from 1963 and Mayerling, released in 1968, often playing noble women or exotic wives. She continued to work sporadically through the 1970s and early 1980s, including a recurring role in the nighttime soap Knots Landing. In 1966, Gardner underwent an elective hysterectomy after her mother died of uterine cancer. Fearing she might share her mother's fate, she chose to have her womb removed and never again face the possibility of pregnancy. That same year, she moved to London to avoid Spain's punitive tax laws. She settled in a flat at 34 Ennismore Gardens in Knightsbridge, which would remain her home for the rest of her life. She appreciated London's relative anonymity and cultivated a circle of British friends. She seemed to fit well with the combination of emotional reserve and appetite for debauchery that is peculiarly English. She attended the opera, read voraciously. Despite her frequent protestations that she was anything but an intellectual, privately she had always enjoyed literature, and enjoyed some peace. Yet, even in middle age, she couldn't escape notoriety. In the mid-1970s, she was banned from the Ritz Hotel in Madrid after urinating in the lobby during a drunken escapade. Such incidents fed the myth of Ava Gardner as the most beautiful hellraiser that ever raised hell. As for movies, Gardner did not retire outright. She acted in television projects, including the 1985 film Maggie. She also participated in 2 made-for-TV movies and recorded voiceover work. But she acknowledged that many of her later film choices were, quote, for the loot. Reflecting on her career, she admitted she was never truly ambitious. "If I were a great intellectual," she told journalist Peter Evans in 1988, "I'd sit and read and study. But I'm not. I don't want to paint. I don't want to write. I want to go out and play tennis. I want to swim. I'm purely a physical piece of machinery. Or I was." It was a frank assessment of a woman who had built her fame on physical allure and who never pretended otherwise. By the early 1980s, Gardner was facing the toll of decades of heavy drinking and smoking. She had been a lifelong bourbon drinker who famously told a bartender, "I'm not a lush, just a drunk." In 1986, she suffered a serious stroke that left her partially paralyzed. Though she was personally wealthy, she allowed Sinatra to arrange and pay for her transportation to a specialist in the United States as a gesture. The stroke curtailed her mobility and limited her ability to perform. She spent much of her remaining 4 years in her London flat with a housekeeper and her dog. Lupus, an autoimmune disease, further weakened her. Ava Gardner's final years were a sobering contrast to the glamour of her youth. Friends noticed that she struggled with loneliness and regret. What memories haunted her as she lay awake in her Knightsbridge apartment? Did she recall the laughter of a Palm Springs night when she and Sinatra shot out streetlights, or the warmth of a Havana balcony with Fidel Castro, or the endless evenings in Madrid's flamenco bars? This time to reflect seemed to weigh on her, and the freedom she had exercised had left a bitter taste as she suffered for her years of wild living. Her final 4 years were, it seems, a time of loneliness and a slow, painful decline towards the inevitable. On the 25th of January 1990, Ava Gardner died of bronchopneumonia in her London home at the age of 67. Her death ended an era of Hollywood glamour intimately tied to post-war America's fantasies and anxieties. In accordance with her wishes, she was flown back to Smithfield, North Carolina, and buried in Sunset Memorial Park beside her parents and siblings. Over 3,000 people filed past her coffin at the Underwood Funeral Home the night before the funeral. There were few celebrities at the graveside service, but the press came in droves, and the first floral arrangement to arrive was from Frank Sinatra. People magazine commemorated her with the headline, "The Last Goddess." Paris Max devoted 2 issues to her, including 8 pages of photographs from the Ava Gardner Museum in Smithfield. In her will, she bequeathed much of her estate to her sisters, her belongings including jewelry Sinatra had given her, letters from Hemingway, and the manuscripts from her memoir and unfinished ghost-written autobiography. Portions of her recorded conversations with journalist Peter Evans were posthumously published in Ava Gardner, The Secret Conversations, in 2013. The book revealed her candid assessment of lovers, co-stars, and herself. It's a fascinating read, and I'll drop a link to it in the description below. Ava Gardner was a liberated woman 2 decades before women's liberation became a movement. That liberation came at a price. Her beauty was a curse from the gods, John Huston said, and she well and truly paid for it. Her high spirits descended into alcoholic abuse. She was banned from hotels and she ended her days in relative anonymity in London. Yet she never hid her past or apologized for living fully. Gardner herself summed up her life with characteristic bluntness. "I was never an actress," she once insisted. "I just walked around in front of the camera and looked pretty." Yet her femme fatale image continues to seduce film lovers, and her story, a dirt poor girl from North Carolina who became a beaming symbol of desire and rebellion, seems to resonate more deeply than a resume of flawless performances. She lived at a time when female stars were expected to be docile, and she rejected that script, even flung it clean out the window. In doing so, she not only enthralled audiences but also expanded the possibilities for what a woman in Hollywood could be. Well, I hope you enjoyed this one. I'd like to take this opportunity to answer a query I see pretty often in the comments to my videos, namely, who am I? I decided to pick this episode to introduce myself as my parents actually named me after its subject. I was born and raised in Los Angeles, so Hollywood lore and movie history were always on my doorstep growing up. These days I live in Europe, which is where I met my good friend Chester. Together we decided about 18 months ago to make use of our spare time to start sharing our interest in classic movie stars, and then later classic rock figures over on the sister channel Rock and Roll Mysteries, which you should check out if you haven't already. It's been an incredible success, far more than we ever imagined. One day we can both perhaps quit our real-world jobs and work on the Mystery Channels full-time. If you want to help us chase that particular dream, feel free to check out the Patreon page to find out how to give your support. Well, I don't know how much I've lived up to Ava Gardner's wild reputation, but in any case, this is her namesake signing off. I'm Ava. It's lovely to meet you, and thanks for listening. Until next time, sweet dreams.